The number of diagonals d in a polygon of n sides is given by the formula d is equal to n multiplied by n minus 3 all over 2. Use the formula to find the number of diagonals in a polygon with 9 sides. Again, use the formula to find the number of diagonals in a polygon with 9 sides. And so we have this formula, d is equal to n, open bracket, n minus 3, close bracket, all over 2. Now here they want us to figure out the number of diagonals, and they give us the number of sides. So they give us what n is. So n is equal to 9. And so that means that wherever we see n, we're gonna put 9. And so we have 9 because n is here. So we have 9 here because n is here. And then we have 9 here because n is here. So we have 9 multiplied by 9 minus 3 all over 2. What is 9 minus 3? Well, 9 minus 3 is 6. And so we have 9 times 6 all over 2. And 9 times 6 is 54. So we have 54 divided by 2. And 54 divided by 2 is 27. So that means that the number of diagonals in a polygon with 9 sides is going to be 27. Next, it says that the number of diagonals in a polygon of n sides is given by the formula. We have the formula here. They want us to use this formula to find the number of sides in a polygon with 90 diagonals. So in this case, we were given what the number of diagonals is, and in this case, it's going to be 90. So d is equal to 90, and they want us to figure out what n is going to be. So they give us the number of diagonals, and they want us to figure out the number of sides. So d is equal to 90, so we replace d with 90. And so we have a 90 is equal to n multiplied by n minus 3 all over 2. And so what we do here is we switch this equation. We put the 90 on the right-hand side, and we put this expression on the left-hand side. Next, we have to distribute. So we say n times n, and we have n times negative 3. Again, we have n times n, and then we have n times negative 3. And so n times n is n squared. That's n times n, that's n squared. And then n times negative 3 is negative 3n. And we put it all over 2, and we set it equal to 90. And so we have n squared minus 3n all over 2 is equal to 90 over 1. Next, we cross multiply. So we have 2 times 90. That's 2 times 90. And we have 1 times n squared minus 3n. That's 1 times n squared minus 3n. And so we have 2 times 90. What is 2 times 90? Well, 2 times 90 is 180. Again, 2 times 90 is 180. And then we have that equaled, and then we have on this side, right? 1 times n squared minus 3n. And so 1 times n squared minus 3n is n squared minus 3n. It's the same thing. And so what we're gonna do here is we're going to take 180 and send it over the equal sign. It was a positive 180, but when we send it over, it becomes negative 180. So we have n squared minus 3n minus 180 is equal to 0. This right here is a quadratic equation. And in order to solve this, we're going to use the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is helpful in solving quadratic equations. Indeed, the general form of a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, where a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is a constant. And so, in this case, a is going to be equal to 1 because the coefficient of n squared is 1, right? So a is equal to 1 because the coefficient of n squared, is 1, or the number in front of n squared is 1. So a is equal to 1. B is equal to -3 because the number in front of n, or the coefficient of n, is -3. So B is equal to -3. And C is equal to -180. That's what C is equal to, -180. And so we have the quadratic formula, and the quadratic formula states that n is equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we know what b is. Well, b is -3, so we substitute. So wherever we see b, we put -3. Again, wherever we see b, we put -3. So it's going to be -3 here and -3 here. And wherever we see a, we put 1. So wherever we see a, we put 1. So a is here, so we put 1, and we put 1 here as well. And c is equal to -180. So we put c is equal to -180. And so that's why we put -180 right here. Next, we evaluate the expression underneath the square root. And so we have -3 squared minus 4 multiplied by 1 multiplied by -180. And so we have that this expression here is going to be equal to the square root of 729. So we have that n is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 729 all over 2. Now, what is the square root of 729? Again, what is the square root of 729? Now, the square root of 729 is 27. But before we even get to that, let us consider n positive. Now, n positive, what does n positive means? Well, n positive means that we are going to put the positive sign in between these two terms. And n negative would mean that we put the negative sign in between these two terms. But let's focus on n positive. So n positive, notice that n could be, n is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 729 all over 2. So we're going to consider the plus version first. So we have n positive is equal to 1 plus the square root of 729 all divided by 2. And so we ask ourselves, what is the square root of 729? And the square root of 729 is 27. And so we have 1 plus 27, and 1 plus 27 is 28. And so we have 28 divided by 2. And 28 divided by 2 is definitely 14. So n positive is equal to 14. Next, let's consider n negative. Now, n negative is going to be, n negative means that we are going to use a subtraction symbol in between these two terms instead of a positive symbol. And so we have 1 minus the square root of 729 all over 2. What is the square root of 729? That gives us 27. So we have 1 minus 27, and 1 minus 27 is -26. Again, 1 minus 27 is a -26. So we have n negative is equal to -26 all over 2, and -26 all over 2. -26 all over 2 is equal to -13. So we have two values of n. One is positive, one is negative. N positive is equal to 14, and n negative is equal to -13. Now our answer is going to be n is equal to 14, and n is the number of people. This cannot be negative, therefore we ignore the negative result. Not number of people, I'm sorry. N is equal to the number of sides. Okay, so let me move that. So n is equal to not the number of people, but the number of sides of the polygon. Okay, so n is equal to the number of sides. So in this case, n is the number of sides. This number cannot be negative, therefore we ignore the negative result. So n is the number of sides of this polygon. That cannot be a negative, so we ignore this negative result, but we keep the positive result. So in this case, n is equal to 14, which means that If we have a polygon that have 90 diagonals, then the number of sides of that polygon is going to be 14. And that's the answer to this particular question.